Hello, good evening, and a very warm welcome to our first Conference Conversations, an interactive online talk show where we will discuss key issues and questions related to the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe on a regular basis. And Conference Conversations are part of a new initiative, the Conference Observatory, which you're going to hear more about in just a moment. My name is Jackie Davis. I will have the privilege of moderating our discussions. And joining me today, I'm delighted to welcome Guy Verhofstadt MEP, co-chair of the Executive Board of the Conference on the Future of Europe, the man in one of the conference's hottest seats in town, and Mehreen Khan, EU Correspondent of the Financial Times, and with me also Janis Emmanouilidis, Director of Studies at the European Policy Centre, and Dominik Hierlemann, Senior Expert at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. A couple of housekeeping notes before we start. This will be a totally interactive discussion. Questions from me to our guests, and then I hope from all of you. You are all muted for now. If you want to ask a question or make a brief comment, and I stress brief questions and comments, please click on the Q&A button and write your question, the Q&A button, not the chat button, or click on the raise hand button if you prefer to speak. And if you have any IT issues, if you use our chat button, one of our wizard team behind the scenes will try to help you. Finally, Twitter hashtag, if you want to tweet out about what you're hearing, it would be great if you could use the hashtag Conference Conversations as well as Future of Europe and COFOE. So before I turn to our guest speakers, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the Conference Observatory. So Dominik, can you just tell me, what are we talking about? What is this observatory and who's involved in the project?
Well, hello to all of you. Thank you, Jackie, for the nice introduction. I'd like to refer at the beginning not to the Financial Times, but to the Washington Post, and their slogan is "Democracy dies in darkness," as we all know. And I think there is one thing that mustn't happen to the conference, and that is that it is covered in darkness, that it remains a Brussels bubble thing only. So, and the conference will only have a chance to succeed if it triggers larger debates, more reflections, and this is where the observatory comes in. So the Conference Observatory is a joint initiative of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the European Policy Centre, King Baudouin Foundation, and Stiftung Mercator. And the idea is, of course, that we observe the conference, that we assess its impact, that we present ideas, how it can be improved. And of course, we want to think beyond the conference and what should happen after the conference. So basically, it's four foundations, four think tanks that had the idea. We're kicking it off, and then we'd like to involve many more policymakers, activists, think tankers, journalists, and citizens. And today is a start, and I'm sure there's more to come.
Thank you very much. Janis, why did you think there was a need for such an observatory? What do you hope it will add, will achieve? I mean, Dominik there was talking about feeding in ideas and so on. Why do we need, on top of the apparatus of the conference itself, an observatory?
I think, well, first of all, Dominik already mentioned that we need to, I think, create attention for the fact that the conference is happening, which is not widely being noticed yet. But I think basically we also want to try to make the best out of the conference. At the end of the day, there are not so many opportunities to discuss at the transnational, the national level about the future of Europe with citizens, but also with representatives from the EU institutions, from national member states. And I think that the experience of the COVID-19 crisis has shown, like also previous chapters of what one could call the perma-crisis, has shown that the need to advance that debate and to also, ambitiously progress in terms of the European Union being able to deal with the challenges which it has been facing and will be facing in future. And the conference, in many ways, is an experiment. It has never done in this way before. And like with every experiment, there will also be moments in which things will not work as perfectly as they could and should. And I think also with respect to the final outcome, we do not know where we will end at the end of the day. So as Dominik was saying, we will monitor, we will provide input, we will advise in order to make the best out of the conference, also to learn the lessons for what happens after the conference, because the conference will not be the end of the story in terms of creating more of a participatory democracy while still being a representative system.
Thank you. So Dominik, how's it going to work? We're going to meet in conference conversations, this format, on a regular basis, and I'm looking forward to that very much. But apart from that, what are we talking about? Other events, publications, what sort of things are you going to be doing?
Yes, of course, all of that. So we're hosting conference conversation. We're doing think tank stuff. As you and Janis were saying, we're thinking beyond the conference. And more concretely, we focus on policy debates, of course. We focus on the new forms of citizens' participation that are being applied and on possible institutional reforms for the EU after the conference. So all of that will be our focus. We put together a high-level advisory group. A couple of things, very honestly, are still in the making, but I'm sure it will not take as long as the setup of the conference.
We'll come back to that later on. Thank you very much for that. So I've been doing a little bit of trawling through some conference speeches, press releases and the Twitter world, just to see what people are saying about the conference. I just wanted to throw a few quotes at you before we get underway. One from Ana Paula Zacarias, announcing details of the European Citizens Panels. She's, of course, the Portuguese Secretary of State for European Affairs and co-chair for the presidency of the conference, saying, citizens will always be at the core of this major European exercise, and we want to give them the opportunity to truly engage and participate. Our common future is in their hands. One of the things I'd like to discuss with our panel is just how we make sure that this debate really is in their hands. Because the president of the European Economic and Social Committee, Christa Schweng, said, Europe belongs to its citizens. The conference can provide a new approach to European democracy by truly listening to the needs of citizens. Link that to what Dominik said about afterwards. Is this a new kind of democracy that we are looking at? And if we are, what shape might it take? Luca Vincenti, talking about the policy objectives, General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, said, we have a responsibility to show to citizens, workers and businesses that a fairer and more inclusive Europe is possible. Together, we need to design a future of Europe that gives back trust to all. And Guy Verhofstadt, our guest this afternoon, said only the other day, the EU will be squeezed like an unripe lemon between rival forces that share neither its values nor its interests. Sad and true, but not unavoidable. The conference needs to develop a renewed vision of Europe's future based on geopolitical strength and belief in itself. So I do also want to discuss with this panel the policy objectives. What are the issues we should be talking about? And lastly, a colleague of Dominik's at the Bertelsmann Stiftung, co-director Malte Zabel, said, the conference is a test case for the European Union, high ambitions, stakes and potential, but also high risk of disappointment. Is that true? And how do we avoid it if it is? So Janis, just before I turn to Guy Verhofstadt and to Mehreen, could you just outline for us, where are we in the process now? We're at a pivotal moment this weekend. We see a big moment in the life of this conference.
Yeah, well, first of all, it took us long to get to the place where we are now, because if we think back, the conference should have already started in 2020. Then we had the COVID-19 crisis. We also had differences between institutions with respect to coming up with the joint declaration. But finally, an agreement was found. On 9th of May, we had our inaugural launch event of the conference. The multilingual digital platform was set up. So now we find ourselves at the moment where we're actually getting things started. As you said, we will have the inaugural meeting of the Conference Plenary on Saturday. We're talking about close to 450 people coming together from representatives of EU member states, EU institutions, at a later point also citizens from the citizens panels. So things are progressing, but the actual work will only start after the summer break. When the European citizens panels, 4 of them, each involving 200 citizens from all over Europe, will come together, have 3 meetings, each of them between September, December, January, to discuss a group of topics. So it's a plethora of topics which also each of the European citizens panels will deal with. And then we will have up to 5 meetings of the Conference Plenary. And the ones in December and January will discuss the recommendations from the citizens panels.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work which is still ahead.
Absolutely. We'll hear where it goes after that a bit later on. But let us cut to the chase. And one issue I do want to talk to our panel about is, as you said, the concrete work getting started really not until after the summer. We haven't got long to do this. A question for later on, can we do very much in the time available? But Guy Verhofstadt, take us back if you would. And thank you so much for being with us. I know this is a very hectic week for you. Take us back to why this matters. Why for you is this conference so important at this particular time in the EU's history?
Well, because I think that the European Union is simply not fit for purpose and not fit for the coming decades. It's even a question if the European Union can survive the coming decades and the new world order. And that becomes, every day more and more clear. And certainly the last years, that was the case. So the world order that we are seeing today, that's not a world order of 200 nation states. It's a world order of empires, with the Americans, the Chinese, who have ambitions, military, politically, economically, with other big powers around the table, and in this new world order, we see a European Union that is not fit for purpose, that is not capable to react instantly, immediately, with the right policies. So the most critical one was the reaction or the non-reaction of the European Union after the financial crisis, where we have waited more or less a decade to do nothing or nearly nothing at all. You saw it also in the COVID crisis. It has taken weeks, months before that everybody said, maybe we have to make from health European competence, because it doesn't work. You see it in the way when we reopen the borders now. We see it certainly in foreign policy. In foreign policy, before we can take even a point of view with the European Union, with the unanimity rule. It takes weeks, months, and that weakens. So this union, sorry, that will not play an important role if it is not changed fundamentally. And that is what we try to answer: how to change the European Union so that it is fit for purpose.
So just to follow up on that, there are people who say, is now really the right time? We are still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Meeting together physically, which this conference will do, is difficult. We have a lot of things demanding our attention. Is now really the time to be embarking on this huge debate about the future? What do you say to those who question the wisdom of doing it now? And also a word, if you would, and then I'll come to you, Mehreen, about why within that process of finding out how we make the EU fit for purpose, why the citizen is so important in all of this, and having this bigger debate that, as Dominik said, goes beyond the darkness and sheds light on what other members of the public.
Let's start maybe with the last element that you're posing. Why this? Because we see in previous exercises that it didn't work, I'm very open about this, even when there are more than 300 people following us. But I'm very open to this. For me, the participation of the citizens is key to push our reforms beyond what normally politicians, and certainly national politicians, are ready to do. It's not the first attempt. Look, we did the convention already. I remember me very well. The Laken Declaration was the basis of the convention, because I was in the chair of the council at that moment. The strategic agenda of the council, we know it. The own initiative reports of the parliament, there are plenty of them. And the papers inside the commission, I think you can fill all your archives of with it. So it's not that this is missing, but we have to recognize it did not work. So we have still the unanimity rule in foreign policy. We have still no fiscal union concerning the economic and monetary union. We are still dreaming, and some people dreaming about European defense, and so on and so on.
So your hope is that the citizens will change the nature of this debate and add a new impetus.
It will create in any way pressure that didn't exist in the past. Look, the way we want to involve citizens is not what most people think. Oh, it's a listening exercise. So most people think, oh yeah, they're gonna listen to the citizens first. No, it's not a listening exercise, not at all. Because if we want to listen to the citizens, we know what citizens want. We have the Eurobarometer, and and that is exactly what citizens want.
Okay, I want to come back on all of that later on in our discussion.
Yeah, so that's not the purpose. The purpose is a two-way interactive exercise where I want that citizens express themselves towards the politicians to say what they want, what their recommendations are. With then the obligation, second part of the exercise, the obligation, the mandatory obligation of the representatives of democracy, parliamentarians, national, European one, to respond to that.
Okay, I'm going to come back on that. Let me hold you there because I want to come back on that point.
I just launched myself to explain you the system.
It's great.
Okay.
No.
Hopefully we come back. We will
come back on all those points, and your passion alone will carry.
We have still 45 minutes to explain.
Absolutely, exactly, Mehreen. For you, you heard there why Guy Verhofstadt believes this conference is so important, and what the Conference Observatory is going to do to try and make it a success. Do you believe this is an important moment, that the conference could provide that impetus, that pressure that Guy Verhofstadt says is needed, or are you among those who are more skeptical about what it can achieve?
Now, I guess I'm in a slightly strange position. I'm not inside the negotiating rooms when this conference is being drawn up. I'm on the outside, actually listening to a lot of people on the inside bitching about each other. So I know that Mr. Verhofstadt said that he doesn't want this to be a listening exercise, but actually when I speak to the Commission officials who are in charge of the conference, they want this to be just a listening exercise. So that's the kind of strange sort of dissonance that you have between the three institutions about what they want to achieve. And it also makes it difficult for journalists who you'll probably notice. I mean, it's not, I mean, as Janis mentioned, it's not getting a huge amount of attention. One is because it's very difficult, I think, for even reporters in Brussels who spend their lives covering trilogues and comitology and various complicated things to get their head around this exercise and explain to their readers what it's supposed to be, because we have three institutions that are still talking past to each other to some degree. And I know that Mr. Verhofstadt said that, you know, we need to go to our citizens on these big issues, but the truth is that there is no internal consensus among member states, among the executive that is the Commission, and among the MEPs about where the EU should go in a lot of these big areas. And I mean, I'm not saying that's a sufficient condition, but it's definitely a necessary condition to try and guide our voters or citizens into directions, because there is so much, you know, real politics still to be won between the institutions. And maybe just on the sense of, you know, the way policy making in Brussels is sort of done the reverse in the way that it should be done, I guess, or is done in a national level. In Brussels, for example, the policy is set by the European Commission. It's then presented to the voters in a sense as a fait accompli, because the proposal's already been done. One classic example is emissions targets. The European Union has a climate law. It has an emissions target which has been raised to 55% to 2030 and net zero to 2050. Nobody in the 2019 elections, when they were voting in the European elections, was voting for a candidate who stood for a mandate to have either of those things, because Ursula von der Leyen wasn't on the ticket. However, 18 months later, we have a system whereby we have a climate law. It's been agreed and is presented to citizens as already as a fait accompli. I would ask the question, if during this exercise we find out that people don't like the idea of accelerating emissions target, is the Commission going to say, we've got to withdraw our plans and we're going to rethink? I mean, the answer is no. So in some sense, there is high risk, because it might just expose some of the huge gaps and reverse way that democracy.
But Mehreen, to play devil's advocate there, also important that we hear those views. From what you're saying, we need to hear those views. So that's why this conference matters so much.
I think we should have heard them, before the Commission was trying to think about how to design a climate law. Of course, I know if there was somebody from the Commission here, they would say, we have impact assessment, we have Eurobarometer polls, etc., etc. But I would still argue that the legitimacy on which some of the major big, epoch-defining policies that the European Union wants to come up with, particularly on its digital agenda and its green agenda, have been done in the complete absence of any real public legitimacy. And I'm not sure the conference is going to fix that because, in a sense, as I said, it's the wrong way around.
Let me come to that in a moment. And I would like to come back later on your point about different people having differing views. And Guy Verhofstadt, I'll give you a chance to react, because Ursula von der Leyen, just to quote her, said at the launch of the conference, our promise is clear. We will listen and then we will act. So if you're being briefed differently by people in the Commission that this is just a listening exercise, be interested to see whether we can tease anything out from Guy Verhofstadt. But Dominik, Mehreen doubting there, saying there needs to be a boost to the EU's legitimacy, but she doubting that this conference can provide it. Do you believe it could provide the boost that is needed?
Well, if it works, of course, if it works, man, that's a big doubt. I mean, picking up on what Guy Verhofstadt was saying, the appetite for the conference is, of course, very unevenly distributed. Yeah, so there is the parliament that wants to be in the driver's seat, more integration, more institutional reforms. So member states, well, for those who want to see a stalemate, so no progress is enough progress. And the Commission is quite ambitious with regard to the citizens' participation process and is doing a lot of good work, I think. But when you speak to different people inside the Commission, you get various answers. Yeah? And I don't really know what the Commission associates with the conference itself. And that's a general problem. So if you speak to 5 people in Brussels, you get 6 different opinions what the conference actually is about. So, and when we want to involve more people in the conference, of course, we need to be in a position to better explain it. On the other hand, for those who want to see more integration on an EU level, like Guy Verhofstadt, I mean, you never get a consensus on any process if this is the clear target. So, and therefore you just kick the ball off, you get it rolling, and then you see where it lands. But the problem is, if you involve in such a process citizens, and everyone is saying we're listening to you, and there will be a clear follow-up process, but of course no one knows what the follow-up process is about, then the risk is that we're not having a snowball effect with regard to more legitimacy, but rather a boomerang effect that we have a big mouth, we announce it as a big thing, but at the end of the day, if it fails, we will be even in bigger trouble.
So should we be doing more to manage expectations, or should we be living up to those expectations? I'll come back to you in a moment. And Julia Fernandez-Arribas says from the audience, thank you very much for setting up such a fantastic initiative. My question is, do you believe the conference will be significant to advance European integration? I'll come back to you, Guy, in a moment, but Janis, briefly, if you would, in terms of where are you in this argument about vital moment, will provide the impetus needed to make a real difference versus quite a lot of skepticism, we may be promising too much and we won't deliver. Where do you come down in that equation?
Well, first of all, we're having the conference. This is why I said
True.
earlier, let's try to make the best out of it.
Yeah.
And now I do not know where we will end at the end of the day. And we could mention a lot of reasons of why potentially it might not work. We already, some were mentioned, people are not aware of it. We have a lack of ownership on behalf of the council. We have in the council many who are very critical of the conference. We also have, I think, some unholy alliances which are pushing from different directions in a direction which will not help the conference to be successful. And we also have a political calendar where we are still waiting for the Germans to go to their federal elections to get a new German government, which will also mean that we also might be losing time on that end. So I could come up with different reasons of why it is so difficult. But at the end of the day, we're still having it. So let's try to make the best out of it. And I think Guy Verhofstadt is right. It comes at a right moment. We know what all the challenges are. And by the way, we know what the challenges are also for a while, and we haven't been able to do our homework. So making the EU, to quote him, fit for purpose, I think makes sense. But the question is, how do you get there? And we've tried different ways. And I think now the conference involving citizens, but by the way, involving citizens, listening to them, but interacting with them, but also having a strong representative dimension. I think that was always one of the deficits when we were discussing the conference for a while. We were only concentrating a lot on the process, how we will involve citizens, which is important, but there's also a very strong representative dimension. And we need to link these things with each other. And the best way we will be linking it would be if we come out with a concrete result, which at the end of the day will exert this pressure function. Would be put pressure on those who are not willing to exceed or not willing to move the extra mile. And I think that also goes for some of the things which are already on the agenda. So when Mehreen was referring to climate and to action with respect to climate change, I think, yes, there's a lot which we're saying in Sunday speeches. The question is, will we actually deliver when we get to the point where we will have to deliver? And I think that the conference could help here, among other things, to put pressure on those who are not ready to go the extra mile, who are not ready to go all the way. So I think that's how you could use it. Will it work? I don't know, but I still think we need it for these reasons, and also because we need to change how we work in terms of our democratic functioning at the national level and also at the European level. So we needed also something new. And this experiment called conference, I think, is the something new we need, and we will have to learn the lessons from it.
Okay, Guy. Going back to that question, do you believe the conference will be significant to advance European integration? Are you confident that it really can make us fit for purpose and deliver that integration? And to Mehreen's point about, is everyone really singing from the same hymn sheet? You see its objective very clearly. You say it's not just a listening exercise. She says she's being briefed by a lot of people that that's what they really hope it will be, and little more. Can you react to that at all?
But if I hear the skepticism of all of you, I can better stay in Brussels in the coming 2 days than going to Strasbourg and lose my time there. Because if I hear the skepticism, then why we do it? Is it necessary? So look, if you start like that, then you do better nothing at all. But that's not the option. It's certainly not my option. I think that we can things move forward with this strategy, and it's true. Mehreen has right. There was certainly by the beginning, when we started this whole operation and this conference, different opinions. There are opinions certainly in the Commission and also with member states who are saying, yeah, we make it a pure listening exercise, and we put on paper what the citizens panels have discussed, and that's it. Thank you very much. And we publish that in a beautiful document, and the exercise is over. By contrast, we are of the opinion, I'm of the opinion, that it's only the start of the exercise. What the recommendations, the opinions are of the citizens has to be the basis for proposals of reform. And we got a big fight about the rules of procedure, let me be very honest, the previous weeks. At a certain moment, I even proposed not to hold the launch of the conference of the 9th of May. If you have no rules of procedures, why you should launch a conference if you don't have that? That helped a little bit to finalize these rules of procedure. And now it's foreseen that there will be a hugely political exercise in the conference. Because if you have only a listening exercise to citizens, obviously, artificially, it looks very sympathetically. You are listening to the citizens. Oh, so fantastic. But what do you do with it? It's what you do with it what is important, not the fact that you are listening and that you respond to it and respond with firm proposals, not so finally, that second route has been accepted. Rules of procedure foresee a plenary with representatives from all national parliaments, national governments, 2 of every government, European Parliament, and the Commission, and foresees that the 4 have to be in agreement before you have solid proposals on which you can build. And that is the unique, I think, advantage of this conference and the chance we have with this conference. It will be conclusions that will be backed by the 4 institutions, because I include now national parliaments in this. It will be very difficult afterwards to say, oh, look, that was an exercise we were not aware of. an exercise we didn't participate in. So with the help of the citizens' participation, what my goal is very clear, that is to create a pressure coming out of this conference that cannot be denied anymore, as it has been denied for in my opinion, for centuries in the European Union. That's to create a climate, an environment, a spirit that automatically leads to things that were never done. Let me give you an example. Foreign policy, end of unanimity. If I have spoken about the end of unanimity in such a configuration as here, let's say 3-4 years ago, everybody of you should have said, wow, what you're talking about, impossible, will never happen. That's the basic of the work in union. Today, with everything what is happening on the world stage, with what is happening in our weak reactions to a number of problems in our neighborhood, even a very conservative Minister of Foreign Affairs like Heiko Maas of Germany is saying,
okay,
we need to get rid of unanimity. I'm going to tell you it will be one of the key issues that we will discuss. The same on the other issue. Yeah, let me, the second
very
example.
If you would, want to bring the others in?
Only that. I tried to finish in one sentence.
It's called conference conversation, so we need to have a conversation.
The thing about Spitzenkandidaten, the same thing. Spitzenkandidaten didn't work the last time because there was no agreement on transnational list and the link between both of them. That will be sorted out. Maybe we can sort out Sofagate also. Or we are busy with all these things. We can maybe sort it out.
Okay.
That is my. And we will create the pressure for it. That's the point. Politics is about power and pressure.
Okay.
Well,
so
if you don't do a conference, you cannot create pressure. You can
indeed
go
not.
home
Mehreen.
and you do other things. But not
so, Mehreen, to those who say we want this to be a listening exercise, Guy Verhofstadt arguing very clearly, it won't be, because the pressure will be too strong for it just to be one, whatever you may have started out with. But there's also a specific question to you from Laura Galanti in our audience saying, thank you for your frank and honest response. As a journalist, what do you believe needs to change for the news agenda to shift its focus on the conference in such a way that citizen engagement is fostered? And how can this coverage be augmented? How do you make this something that journalists want to file, Mehreen? Simple as that.
I think it's a question of sequencing as well. I mean, we haven't really started, which means most of the stories that at least I've been writing about the conference have been about the worst part of it, which is the Brussels part, the institutional fighting, you know, like I said, the briefing against each other. And that's not something that resonates. I mean, it probably resonates a little bit with FT readers, but let's be honest, FT readers are not Europe, and they definitely don't represent a wide spectrum of European society. So I think once the process kicks in from the autumn onwards, actually, probably, as Janis mentioned, when the citizens are involved and you see, you know, it's easier to package stories about, you know, what the group on migration seems to think, or what the feeling is about where EU health policy should go. And also, I think it's also mentioned in the questions, but the French presidency of the EU, which kicks in at the beginning of next year, I think is probably going to be among the most significant variables in understanding how journalists write about the conference. Because, I mean, despite Mr. Verhofstadt's, you know, best attempts, I think when President Macron sort of assumes, and we assume that he is going to assume himself as the face of the conference during the presidency and present its findings, because it's very much been a French baby from the beginning. I mean, I think the media coverage will just kind of, you know, follow. We're going to follow the news to some extent. So it's still a little bit early to say that, you know, the journalists are going to ignore the conference. I don't think that's true. And just, I mean, I think Mr. Verhofstadt mentioned really important issues like QMV and like the Spitzenkandidat, which are quite concrete, coherent, standalone issues which you can present to voters and say, look, here's the context of how these things have been working and here's how we want to fix them. However, again, I'm going to come back to the fact that when I do speak to Commission officials and say, yo, maybe, you know, the Spitzenkandidat thing didn't work out, this is a perfect opportunity to try and work out how best to run European elections. I mean, the answer I invariably get is, well, this is a Brussels issue. This is only people in Brussels care about this. European Union, you know, people in Europe don't care about this. And I find that slightly infuriating. I'm not even somebody who's involved. because I just don't think that's true. But when you come with that mentality, and when the executive is coming with that mentality, I think, you know, I think Mr. Verhofstadt's got a long couple of months to try and resist and fight back against this paucity of expectations, which is coming from the institution you would expect not to have this. I mean, you kind of expect it of some member states, but actually for some reason, the Commission seems to have taken this very risk-averse approach. And I think, I mean, I know there's nobody from the Commission here, but I do really think they need to be held accountable for giving some coherency to what exactly they want.
I'm sure we will hear from them at future conference conversations. You mentioned President Macron, and Caroline Edery in our audience says, what are your expectations about President Macron's harvest of the outcomes of the conference? Janis, that brings me back to the timing issue. Two questions. One, I'd like to come back to Guy Verhofstadt on the pressure of time, but for you, on the political context, we have elections coming up in Germany in September. We won't have a new government, a new chancellor until November. We have the run up to the French elections. You could say President Macron being the one who will harvest, who will steer the end of this process, guarantees that it will deliver because he's invested a lot personally in it. But do you think it's an auspicious time in terms of the broad political context? And then we'll come back on the issue of the timing of the thing itself. But Janis, the political context here.
Well, first of all, I think if someone of a key political actor wants to harvest from the conference, I have nothing against it. If we want the conference to make a difference, political harvesting, will also be something which is key, whether it is President Macron or it's someone else or other players. And I think that you will see that there are also some national players, some heads of state and government, who will also at some point out themselves and become more vocal when it comes also to issues related to the conference, because they think that they can also politically score with the issue. I'm not sure, but I think it will happen. And with respect to Germany, I think that this is an issue because we're going to have the elections at the end of September. Then the coalition government needs to find itself. The new chancellor needs to get into office. So there will be time which that will require, time which I think will be necessary also to put pressure on the conference being more of a success. So I think that one needs to early on make sure that the political Berlin will already be on board when they get into office to quickly get themselves going when it comes to issues related to the conference, which relate to the future of Europe. So you need to prepare the grounds for that already now. But let me just mention two things related to what we were discussing earlier, which I think is necessary in order to increase the pressure function of the conference. One is, yes, we are concentrating a lot on the European level, on transnational discussions, but we also need to foster national debates related to the Conference on the Future of Europe and link these national debates to the European dimension. We've concentrated a lot on the transnational level. This is fine and it makes sense in the context of the conference, but it's not enough because let's be honest, most of the national debate of the debates on politics still happen at the national level. So you need to also have a debate on these issues at the national level and smartly link them up to the transnational level. We haven't been doing that up till now, and there also has been opposition, especially in the Council from member states, to do that. So there needs to be a way to be found to get there. And the other thing is, let's be frank, if you want to actually have a pressure function coming from the conference, you need people to be aware of it. We talked about that early. And that means you need some kind of, I'm exaggerating with the word I'm using, some political drama related to issues dealing with the conference. If you don't have that, if you don't create attention, everything which Guy Verhofstadt is saying, which I agree to, will not lead to the pressure function we need.
So what does political drama look like? A fight on the conference floor?
Well, I think my personal assessment is the closer we get to the final phase of the conference, which means towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, I think that the situation among the key players with respect to the conference will not ease. It won't become easier. So the problems which both Mehreen and Guy Verhofstadt were alluding to, which we have all witnessed in public, but also behind the scenes, I think that they will become stronger as we progress. And at some point, there will be moments equal to what we witnessed before the 9th of May, where certain actors will have to say, well, are we ready to go that way, or are we not ready to go that way? Will we want to have a car crash, or we want to avoid a car crash of the conference? I think then you will get to the moment where you will create some political momentum, also some political drama, and that will lead to attention. And I think that's not bad, because you can now say, are you provoking a political crisis? No, we want to provoke a political debate which creates attention for the conference, which can help it to make a difference at the end of the day.
Okay, Dominik, I want to come to a question which is dominating. And can I ask audience, please, could you keep your questions as brief as possible? I've got some that are huge paragraphs, and at a glance, I can't see what your point is or who you want to know it from. So short as you can, if you would, but lots of questions, comments, Dominik, relating to the role of citizens in all of this. Some people suggesting, one person, Julia Worth, saying, wouldn't it be enough to say this conference is a success because it's succeeded in involving citizens and we tried out this form of participation? Next time we can expect big outcomes. So she's quite modest, saying the point here is to do it and make the process work, and then we can build on it. Elif Kavaslu says, in my opinion, the biggest achievement of the conference would be increasing the public's interest in EU affairs. However, the platforms and activities held do not seem to be suitable for this purpose. It's still the small EU bubble. What can be done about that? Question to you on that note, and I'll come back to you in a minute, Guy Verhofstadt, on the national level. Just to give you some of the statistics, I had a look just before we started today's talk show. 17,279 participants in the digital platform, 4,520 ideas, 1,088 events. So things are moving, but lots of questions about how you involve the citizens, how they're chosen, etc. Dominik, to make the citizens element, you're an expert in participatory democracy, to make this really work and to have the national debates, the European level debates, the citizens element really input most effectively. What is the key to success here on that element of it?
The key to success, I've got to admit I'm still struggling with the fact of being pigeonholed as a skeptic by Guy Verhofstadt, while in fact I've been telling to everyone who wants to hear it or who doesn't want to hear it that this is the most innovative exercise in citizens' participation on the EU level for decades, and that it can create actually a new participatory infrastructure which we haven't seen before. And I still believe in that. So, but for that, we need to take citizens' participation seriously, of course. And I think, yes, it is a success to involve citizens in that endeavor. But if you involve citizens and if you tell them you will have a say, then it's not enough just to say we will follow up in the results in various ways. So there needs to be tangible results. So where could be tangible results? A lot of people are saying, well, citizens are not interested in democracy issues and institutional issues. This is not my experience. Of course, people are interested in policy areas, in policy issues, but they are interested also in institutional stuff. And I can tell you why. Because it is precise. It is precise. You can come up with very clear proposals. You can say Spitzenkandidaten is a good idea, it's a bad idea. We propose something alternatively. You can say transnational list, it's fine. Whereas all the other policy areas are often far more complicated. With regard to the platform, yes, so there could be more going on, but on the other hand, let's be honest, we shouldn't be more papal than the Pope, more royal than the king when it comes to these kind of efforts. So we are also the press, I must say, to bring in Mehreen. The press is sometimes far more critical towards these new exercises and is applying different standards than to what's normally going on in parliament and in representative democracy. So we're still trying out something new. But for the platform, of course, we need to see more efforts in member states. We need to see more marketing. It's not enough for the Commission just to involve Europe Direct centers and create lots of leaflets. So there will be nothing going on. It's really in the hand of member states, and they've got to do more. And traffic creates more traffic. And once we see reports about the citizens' panels, then of course there is something going on. So there is a problem with the time frame that was mentioned, because for serious citizens' participation, you need time, of course. Time is crucial. If citizens feel that they are hurried through a process, they just don't like it. Yeah. And if citizens feel that their voice is not being heard, and they talk to plenty of Brussels journalists who are very keen on picking them up, then we're having a problem. So it is really key to shed a light on the citizens' participation process, to involve experts in the process. And I know there is lots of people involved and they give advice. And I think it will be a good process, but also being a bit patient with what's going on.
Thank you. And I want to come back to that follow-up later on. But Guy Verhofstadt, as I say, lots of questions, and I'd like you to react to what Dominik was just saying, but questions including how are ideas from the digital platform being selected? How will they be clustered to inform the citizens panels? And will that be a transparent process? Are you satisfied with the participation on the platform? And an interesting question from Gisela Erler, who says, when we talk of citizens, is it clear that we're focusing on the randomly selected assemblies that have the core role? Because she says on the platform and civil society groups, we expect mainly topics that are well known, whereas the forums, she argues, will most likely come up with the different priorities and suggestions for compromises. Question also from Maya Vessinger, what is being done to engage marginalized communities across Europe in this process? So a lot of questions about the weight you will give to citizens panels, the weight you will give to the digital platform, and how you're going to manage all this vast input.
Well, first of all, on the digital platform, it's clear that we need the number of activities and events that I find. I look to with satisfaction. When you have more than 1,000 events already organized in the 4 corners of Europe, that's okay. The number of accounts, I think, is a little bit low, but yeah, it's not like the followers of a popular Facebook page. That is not. It's an in-depth discussion what we're trying to do on the digital platform. But there is 3 types of engagement possible. You can get information on the platform, you can create activities on the platform, or you can participate in debates on the platform. So that's okay. The conclusions of the platform, there is a little bit of artificial intelligence behind. It will be the basis for the discussions in the citizens panels, but it will be the citizens panels themselves who receive a field on which they can discuss, but they will decide themselves what the key issues are that they will discuss in the citizens panel. So there is no pre-selection by our field, by the political level, to say, you have to discuss A, B, and C as questions. No, they're gonna do that themselves. That will happen in these 4 citizens panels in small working groups. So a citizens panel will be split up in at least 15, maybe 20 working groups, because we want very small groups discussing with each other. And then it will also take time. We will not rush. The citizens panels will run from September until end of January, beginning February of next year, and there will be at least 3 gatherings of more than on several days to organize this. So what we are doing is simply we have asked to a specialist and to help us in the development, because for the European Union it's a completely new exercise, an experiment. We never did it in the past. So it are organizations with the experience they have. They guide us in this process. And then comes the second part of the conference. Some wanted already to stop then the conference, but for me, the second part of the conference start, where the citizens panels sent from the beginning on their representatives to the plenary, so that they can also, when they explain their proposals or their considerations, say to, when they hear what the political side wants to do with it, they say, yeah, but that's not what we want. That is not our intention. You need to go further. You need to give a real response to what we are asking for. So there, from in fact already December on, and certainly in January and February, the conference will become an exercise in which we have an interaction between, what I should say, citizens who will give the input, and then politicians who will discuss what the output will be for the input.
Well, I'm going to come back on the output question in a moment, but just staying, Mehreen, if I could, with this, the role of the citizens, this question that I mentioned about marginalized communities. It's very hard to reach some parts of the community and get, and also somebody else here, Melissa Julian, talking about how do we ensure an evidence-based, rule-based, moderated debate on migration issues that represents all citizens' views. What for you do you think is the key? Is there a way to reach out to people who would not normally engage and really get to them? And do you think you have a role at all as a journalist in trying to generate that sort of interest?
I don't know what Dominik's thoughts are on this, but I think there's a potential selection bias issue that the people engaged already, the people that are aware, therefore you have the issue of the marginalized communities. I think one of the issues that I might have mentioned was also the way that the citizens are picked, and I think there was an absence of basic criteria to ensure sort of religious or ethnic diversity, and that was done because it seemed to be too sensitive for some EU countries. I think that would be an absolutely wasted opportunity if you just have a system where this apparently colorblind system. I think that's another way that people will use to discredit the conference if it's just basically a lot of white people, and also I mean. I think the migration one is interesting. I think, you know, if journalistically, if we saw the panels playing out and you saw actually that a lot of people involved were less hostile about migration that their governments claim that they seem to think that their people are, I think that's a genuinely interesting way to try and work out whether some of the rhetoric and the entire consensus among left, liberal, right-wing populist parties in Europe is that migration is something that our citizens are very wary of, and we need a fortress Europe because we've decided that actually this is something that's a bit too dangerous for our societies, be it because of, you know, concerns about integration or security or the economy. I mean, that's quite a, you know, that would be a really tangible, counterintuitive way that would put pressure on governments to say, actually, your people, or a lot of people, are not as hostile to migrants as you think you are. So I think that's one of the few topics that came out to my attention as something to watch out for. And maybe just, you know, on bringing people in that wouldn't be in. I mean, let's be honest, right now, as we sit here, there is an exercise of trans-European pan-EU movement going on, which is engaging tens of millions of people who every day probably sit down in front of their TVs, they turn it on, and it's called the European Championships, right? That is, I mean, a very good example of an emotional issue where people genuinely feel something at stake. It also gives them a sense of Europeanness. So maybe if I'm going to offer my free consultancy, maybe Mr. Verhofstadt could go to Wembley Stadium in a couple of weeks at the finals of the European Championships and just hijack the whole thing and announce the conference. I mean, it will definitely get some attention.
Or the conference.
If Belgium can win, no problem. I go with you.
Or you can organise a little tournament in the margins of the plenary between the parliamentarians and the representatives of civil society. I don't know.
Well, UEFA are setting up their own conference on the future of football. I think that's a perfect thing that the conference should hijack.
I will not participate. I'm a cyclist. So.
Dominik, you wanted to come in.
Yes, I just wanted to step up my optimistic efforts with regard to representativity. So, because there, I think the organizers, I'm sure, will be doing a really good job. And of course, you can apply 10 criteria without any problem. But if you finally look at the people who will be participating in these European panels, you will see just by the sheer look at them that this is the most diverse crowd that has ever attended an EU event. So, I mean, that will be diverse. I mean, we always talk about representativity, and if you do that in a statistical sense, it will never be representative. That's not the question. Will it be more diverse than before? Will it represent the people from all over Europe? And there I would say, yes, that will be the case. So that is not the problem. With regard to the citizens panels, it's more about the process. Is it done well? And about the links to the plenary. This is the important thing, because if you look into the plenary, I'm sure you will find plenty of colleagues of Guy Verhofstadt who say, well, it's participation, but most of all, it's a communication thing. We need to do communication a bit differently, and now we're involving people a bit differently. But if you ask citizens, and they are going to Maastricht, to Dublin, or wherever, and they participate in such an event, they go home, they delve into the topic, they do some research, they want to see something coming out of it, and they take it seriously. So for them, it's very often that they work on something and then they want to see it implemented. So everyone is talking about expectation management. It's but it's not just about citizens, it's expectation management towards citizens, towards parliamentarians, towards the general public, and towards the media. And I also want to support Janis. So the citizens panels, the European panels, they will be all right from a methodological point of view, but we really do not know what's going on in member states. So far, many member states, they are busy with creating logos, but I don't know what's coming next. And there, I think it's really absolutely crucial that more things will be happening.
Janis, a word to this, and then I want to come to outcomes, because lots of questions relating to the outcomes of the conference. But Janis, and you mentioned this point about linking the national debates, which Dominik just picked up on. What for you is the key to making that connection work?
Well, first of all, the key would have been that we would have agreed on how to organize national debates, but we couldn't agree on that. And I remember when I was having discussions with different actors who were preparing themselves to conclude the joint declaration, and I was saying, well, we also need to provide a framework for what should happen at the national level in order to have efforts at the national level and also to make them comparable with each other, and so that they can then feed into the transnational level. And so we were discussing this, and I was explaining, and we were discussing, and then I was told, well, this is something we will never get through because the member states in the council are not ready to agree on other things. So if you tell them what to do at the national level, they will never buy into this joint declaration. So we will not get there. So I think now we have the mess we have. That doesn't mean, and I'm an optimist, and I fully agree with what Dominik was saying earlier. I don't put myself into the skeptic camp when it comes to the conference, not at all. But I try to be realistic. And so now we have what we have. So the question is, how can you foster the debate at the national level? And that can only be done if you have at the national level certain actors who buy into this, who show a certain interest, and who also think that it is in their political interest to get themselves engaged. If you don't get that, you won't have that kind of a discussion at the national level, because we have not agreed from the outset of what we want to do. So we are dependent on what will happen in the member states. And we know that some countries, Ireland will do well, other countries will do well, and others, and we saw that also in the European citizens consultations, will do less well. So there's also a question of how we can help these countries, how we can also exert some peer pressure on them. Say, look what is happening in countries which are dealing with this at the level of, at the national level very well. Can you also do something in the same way, rather than having a foreign minister or a Europe minister giving a speech and then taking 3 questions and arguing that is an event related to the Conference on the Future of Europe, which it is not.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know whether you want to very briefly react to that discussion, or shall we move to outcomes? Let me read you, because there are so many of them. I'm going to lump them all together and ask you to pick up on them. Gerald Christian Heinkes says, my question is, how do you safeguard the results, that the results of the conference are transferred into politics? Ralph Drachenberg says, Guy Verhofstadt knows, based on his experience with the Laeken Declaration, how important the buy-in from EU heads of state is. How to get the European Council to implement the outcome of the conference and not ignore it, like the outcome of the Commission's white paper on the future of Europe process in Sibiu. And then more on that, we have Johannes Greubel says, how ambitious can the conference results be if decisions need to be taken by consensus of all 4 institutions in the plenary and executive board? How can we avoid that this need for consensus will lead to lowest common denominator positions, which are not very concrete and do not lead to tangible results? Let's stop there for a moment, Guy. So lots of questions about the outcomes and whether it really can provide that push you want, given the process.
Well, you know, when this whole process started and when there was a discussion about joint declaration, I called it the governance of this whole thing at a certain moment a bureaucratic nightmare. I think that was more or less what I tweeted at that moment.
You were a skeptic.
No, it's far worse than that. So it was I have to tell you that it's still a nightmare. I can tell you. You maybe you don't see it, but with 3 institutions organizing a conference like that, well, I can tell you that's not an easy thing to do. But every disadvantage has his advantage. That is a famous phrase by a very good footballer, Johan Cruyff. That was a Dutch footballer. You know Johan Cruyff? He said, elk nadeel heeft zijn voordeel. So every disadvantage has its advantage.
And what's the advantage
of this bureaucratic nightmare?
Tell us.
in the governance. I'm talking now about the governance of
Yep.
the whole thing and what I experience every day. The advantage is the following. It will be the first time that it is a common initiative of the three institutions, further support by national parliaments, and in top of that, and full involvement, citizens' participation. You know, in the past, the example has been given. The white paper of the Commission. Okay, white paper of the Commission, nothing happened with it. The strategic agenda of the Council, yeah, that's something that you refresh. They refresh it every 2 years, and it's over. The own initiative reports of the Parliament. I have written a number of myself, and yeah, it disappears in the archives of the Parliament. So that is what is happening when we do it in the old-fashioned way. So the advantage of this is that everybody will be there. There will be 2 representatives of every member state approving the conclusions. 4 parliamentarians of every parliament, all the commissioners, the college, and so on, and the European Parliament. It will be very difficult afterwards to say, oh, look, I was not involved. I'm surprised I was not there at the moment that we discussed this. And also because of the pressure and the involvement of the citizens, it will be very difficult to do that. So I see it certainly also because the first results will be given to the French presidency. And let's be honest, you can say everything what you want about Macron, but it's a pro-European who has in fact a not very French idea about European politics. He has a more, I should say that under Macron, it's a more German thinking that was introduced in French politics about Europe. While at the other hand, in German politics, they became more and more French thinking about European politics. There is a change in position, as we have seen since the reunification of Germany the last 20 years. So we will give this result to somebody who, I met him several times. I talked a lot of times with him about European politics. We really believe in Europe. It's not a French ordinary thinking saying what is good for France is good for Europe. That was the more or less summary of European thinking in France. That is not that. So I think that the uniqueness of the process, the unique involvement of citizens will create under the French presidency and even afterwards, also with the new German government, will be a different government, a different chancellor, a different chancellor.
Yeah.
So but that is something that I believe in it.
But Mehreen, I mean, this argument that says that they're all round the table, they'll all be signed up to what comes out of it. It's going to make it more difficult for them, and journalists will hold them to account if they then simply say, well, thank you very much, that was all very nice, but we're not changing the treaties and we're not doing that and we're not doing that. So thank you, lovely exercise. I mean, do you think he has a point here? It's a really difficult way to organize something, but they will all be invested and it will be hard to resist the pressure.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of outcomes and what's a positive outcome, I think we've already seen one, which is the gradual thawing of some of the member states who were very suspicious of this thing, who are now less suspicious. I think over time, if you come to a situation where member states and governments are less threatened or scared by processes of deliberative democracy or giving their voters chances to speak about European issues, in the long run, that's a good for European democracy. And I know treaty change is the obsession of some people, and for others, it's a complete no-go. But if we get to a world where less governments, and I think this is where Macron is right. I mean, he wants treaty change because he wants to have this big public debate about what the future of the EU is, and he wants to have it in full awareness that there is right-wing populists in his country, and he wants to take them on, and he wants to win. And I think that's a really, that's fundamentally a very healthy attitude. If only that could be spread to a few more governments. I mean, Mr. Verhofstadt mentioned Johan Cruyff, who is, of course, a very famous Dutchman. The Dutch government's ambivalence on issues about the European Union and public awareness about the European Union.
That changed. You shall see the new government with Sigrid Kaag, D66, a pro-European party. So it's changing. Even there, it's changing.
Exactly. So if governments feel like there's not an electoral loss or a risk that they could suffer from this exercise, I think that's good. If they basically embrace it and realize actually getting people to talk about Europe doesn't mean that they're going to kick us out of the ballot box.
I think your point you made earlier, how do you convince them that it's in their political interest to invest? Janis, you wanted to come in, and Dominik, then I wanted to come into a question with you just to alert you. A couple of questions from the audience about the future. we talked earlier about, is this going to deliver a new kind of democracy? And a number of questions about beyond the conference and citizen involvement. But Janis, you wanted to briefly react to what Mehreen was saying.
Yeah, just 3 comments. One relates to the German government. It's not only that there will be a new German chancellor, you can also expect that the Greens will be playing a key role in this next German government. I think that is going to make a difference, especially when it comes to European policymaking. I'm not saying that we will have a revolutionary change in Berlin, but it's going to set a scene which will be different to what we've had up till now, which means prepare the grounds before they come to power in order to have the right partners in Berlin ready and steady to go already from November onwards. The second point is, Guy Verhofstadt was mentioning the issues between the institutions. Let's not forget that there are also different positions within the individual institutions. So we also have differences within the institutions, which I think will become more and more visible as we get into the final phase. And the last point, Mehreen, when you were taking the example of migration, I think you were right. I think we will see in the conference, if we have discussions related to the issue of migration, that at the end of the day, we will see that there's more readiness to show solidarity. Solidarity with those knocking on our doors and solidarity between member states. But we will still not, and you know that perfectly well, will not have overcome the problem which we have with those member states who actually do not want to show a higher level of solidarity. And they will also try to use the conference arguing, look, they're trying to push us in a direction we don't want to go. We are sovereign countries. We will not adhere to that pressure. So we know that this is going to be, even if you have the pressure function, which Guy Verhofstadt is speaking about, others will be using that pressure function to strengthen their argument, which everyone in this virtual room is against.
Thank you very much. I wanted to come, Gisela Erler has a question. Gisela, I'm going to allow you to talk, but let me just read it. I think Gisela's question also, you need to unmute yourself, Gisela, if you want to put your question. Links, I think, to something also Victoria Palotai says. Do you think citizens should be involved more in the consultation on EU policy as a result of this conference and do it on a more regular basis? And Gisela, I think your mic is activated. I think you had a related point to this.
Well, thank you. What I want to say is that, well, I passionately believe that this will start a new process of awareness, also primarily among the public, even if it's not so well known yet, because what we have with the citizens' assemblies is a first time that we have a pan-European sort of citizens event. People are experiencing, will be experiences that they are sort of a common entity as European citizens. That's very new because the parliament has that and the European institutions have that every day. The people never have it. So I think that quality will give a lot of inspiration. But I also think that it will start a process. It will, we will see people come up with basically more of Europe, common defense, etc. Eastern European governments.
Lisa, sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to be very brief. We're almost out of time.
Okay. So what I think is, let's think of this as the start of a process which continuously will involve citizens in decision making also before decisions are made, and then have this as a legitimate element in the European policy process.
Thank you. Dominik, to this point, a new kind of democracy. Are we on the verge of a different way of doing business on a more permanent basis, or will this conference, as previous exercises in citizens' consultations and so on, do you fear it will be a one-off?
It's a difficult thing to interrupt Gisela Erler, who is the grande dame of citizens' participation in Germany, and
time is against us.
Really a trailblazer when it comes to new forms of democratic engagement and participation. So Mehreen just mentioned it. I give you an example. The interesting bit is when you were talking about democracy and new forms of democracy 10 years ago to policymakers in Brussels, they were saying, oh, no, please stay away with direct democracy. So we've had our bit, yeah, of course. So they were constantly defending representative democracy. Now, when you now go to Brussels, yeah, and suddenly you hear people like Guy Verhofstadt, like Commissioner Suiza and others, talking about the Irish example as if they know everything about it, talking about the climate convention. So they're going into a direction where deliberative democracy is seen not as a new normal, but as an opportunity. So where we're actually talking about a more diverse democracy, where different forms, representative democracy, direct deliberative elements, can be combined. And the interesting bit is that the EU has always been, I mean, by definition, a political entity that is evolving and that is more open-minded with regards to these new forms than politicians on the national level. On the national level, it's all about defending the status quo, whereas the EU level, so the EU bubble, very much knows that EU institutions have to evolve in order to be sustainable. So, and this is a catalyst for change. And another example, and then I wrap it up, is that also on the local level, we're seeing now initiatives in the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe, where cities and regions are saying, yes, we want to try out random selection. Yes, we want to do transnational debates and revive the idea of jumelage in a different way. So this is all interesting. So therefore, it's the conference shouldn't be only a talking shop, a talk fest. Definitely not, but it's worth the effort, and also to improve the links between citizens and all the different institutions.
Thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but I want to ask our guests today, Mehreen and Guy Verhofstadt, a final question. And to do so, I wanted to quote a Commission Vice President and Conference Co-Chair, Dubravka Šuica, who said in March, when the conference was launched, the conference will enable citizens from every corner of the European Union and from all backgrounds to share their ideas, hopes, and dreams in shaping Europe's future. So my question to you, speaking as citizens rather than with your political responsibility or your journalistic responsibility hat on, as citizens, do you have a dream outcome for this conference, something that you hope it will achieve above all else? And one of our audience said, what does success look like? What would be success? For you, Mehreen, what would be your hope for this conference?
Well, I'm a British citizen, so I think more
I know, but you're still a citizen of the world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think if, from a journalistic perspective, somebody writes about European affairs, admittedly to an audience and a readership that's quite well versed in European affairs, I think if it increases the overall awareness, literacy, knowledge about how the institutions work, I think that's a good thing. I know Brexit and the referendum process, of course, is seen with a huge amount of suspicion, but one thing it did manage to do in the UK is create a national conversation about European issues, which up until that point were not really had. I mean, people were discussing the common fisheries policies, in the aftermath of the European of the referendum. And yes, of course, the context was that there was a vote to leave, but just having that kind of immediacy where people realize and are vested in the fact that there is this institution, this executive, and policies that affect their lives, then that, for me, that's a tangible and a long-term gain that can come out of this exercise, particularly if it remains permanent and iterative, which I know lots of people here have said that they would like to happen.
Thank you very much. Guy Verhofstadt, you started by talking about that pressure you hope this will put on politicians to go to places they haven't been willing to go to before. But among all the issues we've discussed, do you have a dream? Is there one thing you personally hope comes out of all of this?
I have a very long list of things.
Okay, well,
and she becomes longer and longer every year that I'm longer in European politics. My list becomes longer and longer. So the main, I think it could be the start of a process, the start of changes that were unthinkable until now. And I thought I spoke a few moments ago about unanimity. I know people are saying, but that's an institutional issue. People are not interested in it. We have to end this stupid game. Oh, it's policies or it's institutions. Look, with bad institutions, you have bad policies too, because you cannot develop them. And why, if you have no idea of what good policies you want to elaborate, why you should need then institutions that can work? So there is no difference. Both are coming together. And what I hope is that that this process and this conference lead to the approval, even by member states who are very reluctant, that they cannot go further on the route as today. That needs to change. and the understanding that they will play no role at all in the world, and it will be others who will decide on our interest and our way of lives if we don't change the fastest as possible. So I hope that it will be the outcome, and therefore the conference and the involvement of citizens is for me, a crucial tool and a crucial instrument to achieve that.
And on that note, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you particularly, Guy Verhofstadt. I know what a hectic week this is. We wish you the best of luck. Mehreen, thank you so much. And thank you for your frankness and honesty as a journalist myself. The challenges, as you say, of covering something which till now has been all process and not so much content are immense, but you do a great job at it. Janis, Dominik, I'll see you again at the next conference conversations. Thank you to all of you for joining. We are going to be back next month for the second in our series of conversations. In the meantime, we do urge you to follow the Conference Observatory on Twitter, where you can be kept constantly informed about what's happening, further activities within the observatory, but also updates on what's happening in the conference and get the observatory's analysis assessments of those developments. And in the spirit of participatory democracy, which is what the Conference on the Future of Europe is all about, we wanted to make conference conversations more participatory. So in a moment, when you log off, you will see a question, and the question is going to ask you what topics, what questions you would like us to discuss in future conversations. So please join that discussion as well as joining the conference itself discussions on the digital platform. We want to hear from you what you want us to talk about. Thank you for all your questions. Managed to touch on many of them, not all of them, but there was something like 30 of them, so we squeezed as many as we could. Thank you all very much indeed again. I look forward to seeing you next month. May I wish you a very pleasant evening and take care. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.